Welcome to the first ever episode of Girl, Let's Be Honest. My name is Nikki Moore. I'm your host, and I probably thought about starting a podcast like a million times and finally just decided to say, fuck it, I'm gonna go for it. And it does seem, I'll admit, very intimidating and very scary because I'm just putting myself out there for the world to judge me. But I've kind of always taken the big risks. And I do just really want the tone of this pod to be like the girls group chat coming to life. We're gonna be sharing all of our deepest insecurities, fears, trauma dumps, relationships, big wins, cheating stories, fitness journeys, eating disorders, basically just all the things that women go through but don't always talk about. And I do think it's probably important for me to share a little bit about myself so you can get to know me. This is Aspen. I grew up in the suburbs outside of Portland, Oregon, and I grew up in what I grew up in what I would consider white trash. I can say that, but you can't. I was raised by a single dad with three girls, me and my sisters. I'm the youngest. My mom, she spent most of her life in and out of prisons, doing drugs, choosing men. My little brother was actually conceived while my mom was serving one of her prison sentences back in the 90s. So Oregon didn't have a women's prison back then, and it was co-ed. So when my little brother was born, my grandparents ended up taking him and raising him. I always joke that we were white trash, and I do stand by that. But my dad really did the best he could given what he had. But I was being raised in a house full of addicts where there were no rules, no boundaries, no consequences, and no supervision. And he was just a functioning alcoholic, and the rest of my families were drug addicts. And we all lived together at my grandma's house. And I mean, it was giving shameless. My grandma, bless her heart, she was not a drug addict, but she was an enabler. And our house in the early 2000s was definitely on the most watched list of the county police department. So growing up, my bed was in the kitchen. Like I literally slept in the kitchen until my dad got married and we ended up getting our own apartment. I think I was 12, but it honestly didn't take me very long to follow in my family's footsteps. I started using drugs at 16. I was a full-blown addict by 18. Excuse me. I had overdosed twice and found myself in a revolving door in jail until I turned 23 years old. During one of those long-term stays in jail, I was offered inpatient treatment at the facility that was across the street from the jail. It's called the Restitution Center. And I decided that I would really actually try to get clean because my dad's health had taken a turn for the worst. He needed a liver transplant. And even though he had quit drinking 7 years before we got that news, his liver was failing. So he really begged me to get clean. And I did think that I should give it another chance. And I remember being 41 days clean when I finally got to go outside of the facility for an activity with my mentor and the rest of the girls in the treatment dorm. And at that time I had asked my mentor if I could use her phone so I could call my dad. And when he answered the phone, I thought he would be really happy to hear that I was doing really good and that I was in treatment. But he just sounded so different. And he told me that he really couldn't worry about me because he had problems of his own to worry about, and that he was currently in the hospital. And this was a guy who always put me first, and that honestly feels really selfish to say. But for the first time, he was worried about himself over his own kid. So I knew something was wrong. And a couple days later, I got called into my counselor's office and was told I needed to call my stepmom. And then she told me that they had had a family meeting and that my dad probably wouldn't live past the weekend. So I asked my mentor to take me to go see my dad. And And we went to the hospital, and my dad, who was, he was never a small guy. Like shit, when he was drinking, he was like over 300 pounds. And even when he quit drinking, he was just about 190, I think. But he was like really tall. He was like 6 foot, and he looked so frail in the hospital bed. And he was wearing a diaper. Sorry, Dad. But he was, it's true. And he told me that he just wanted me to go back to treatment, but I had begged him to let me stay with him. And now it wasn't really possible for me to stay with him because technically I was still in custody, and I had to complete treatment in order to actually be free. So I contemplated like not going back, and just dealing with jail after the whole thing was over, but my dad and my sister had convinced me just to go back and that I could go see him the next day. So I gave my dad a kiss and I told him I'd see him tomorrow, except I couldn't go see him the next day because my mentor was sick. So she didn't come to work and they wouldn't allow me to go without her. And I was able to call my dad and talk with him Friday. But when I called on Saturday, my family had told me that he had gone into a coma. They placed the phone to his ear so I could talk to him. And I really tried to think of everything I wanted to say. But what do you say to your dad, who's been your only parent, your person, your best friend? How do you say goodbye? I just will never forget speaking into the phone, just trying to convey to my dad how much I've always loved him and how he's always been my hero. And I knew that I'd be able to go see him and say goodbye on Monday, but he had passed away 4 hours before I could come. So they kept him there for me to say goodbye. And it just still to this day like doesn't seem real when I think about it. Like I think about that whole experience and I wish I could sit here and tell you that I actually stayed clean, but I wasn't ready. I couldn't deal with the grief and I was feeling feelings for the first time in years. And it was just all too much for me to handle. And I was just 21 years old without my dad. I did, however, get clean 2 years later. I just celebrated 12 years clean yesterday. My dad's death anniversary was the day before. So every year I get to mourn my dad and then I get to celebrate my accomplishments. And I know he'd be so proud of me each year. And I know he'd be so proud of me each year that I've been able to stay clean my life. And I definitely do want to share like my full recovery story, but I think I'm going to save that for its own episode. There's a lot of like nitty-gritty that goes into that, and I feel like it just deserves its own. But I didn't graduate high school, but I did get my GED in jail for free. But I never really thought about doing more than just working any job I could find. Like nobody in my family had gone to college. So I ended up working as a server and then deciding that I wanted to go to school to be a drug and alcohol counselor, which I think a lot of people in recovery do. But I was about a year into my classes and I realized that like that's just not what I wanted to do. So I just withdrew and I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And then one day I was at work and I got this six top of medical sales guys and surgeons. And then they told me, hey, you should be a nurse. And I was like, oh, I have too many felonies. And they laughed and then suggested I should be a dental hygienist. And I've always really liked the dentist. I didn't actually get any dental care until I was 23, but I remember like I had a ton of cavities and the dentist and the hygienist were always so kind to me. They never made me feel like less than or like, oh my God, you're in bad shape. And so I really appreciated that. And it's like dental care just wasn't a priority in my family, and my drug addiction didn't really help. So my oral health just wasn't really good. But I decided that I did want to look into hygiene school, and I started looking at the different schools in my area. And I think the first thing I needed to figure out was if I was even going to be able to get licensed with my criminal history. So I got a hold of the Oregon Board of Dentistry, and basically they let me know that it's pretty much case by case basis. And so I felt like I had like such a kick-ass comeback story that I should just go for it. And I took all my prereqs. I applied for Pacific University. It's the only place I applied for, and I actually got in. And boy, let me tell you, that shit was hard. I mean, I was crying like multiple times a week, and I don't really cry. And I became a mom in 2020. I ended up taking in my cousin's daughter. She really needed like a better chance at life. And I really wanted to like break the cycle with her. And I felt like I was just in the right position to be able to do that with her. At the time that I got her, I was engaged to a man that I had been on and off with for 4 years. It was a very, very toxic relationship. And every time I would decide it's time to leave, I would get an apartment, I would move all my stuff, start fresh, and then just allow him to break me down little by little until he would eventually convince me to come back. This happened 4 times. I realize now I realize now how important no contact is, but I was very young when we started dating. I was 27, he was 12 years older than me. And he ended up buying me a car after we got back together. I think it was after the first time. And by the third time that I had left, I was going to go to a football game down in Oakland. And while I was out of town, he offered to put snow tires on my car because winter was coming. And this really wasn't anything new or different than how he's always been. So I didn't really think anything of it. But how dumb I was. He ended up emptying out my car, taking it to his warehouse, locking it in there so I wouldn't be able to come get it. Then he sent me an email. And yes, you heard that right. An email. Basically telling me he took my car, I wasn't going to get it back. He ended up blocking me so I couldn't get a hold of him. And I was about to board my flight home, and he was my ride home from the airport. So I had to call my sister and ask her to come pick me up, take me straight to his house. I used the garage code to get in. And honestly, I was shocked he hadn't changed it. And I found him in bed on a bender with an engagement ring by his bed. And he told me I could either put the ring on my finger or I'd never get my car back. Those are my options. So I put the fucking ring on my finger and I got my car back. And I told him if we were going to get back together and if we were going to get married, I wanted to move back to my hometown. So he agreed. And once we moved back into his other house. So once we were back in his other house, I had room for my daughter to come live with us. Well, his daughter also came and moved in with us. And this was during the pandemic. And these kids were 12, and these kids were wild. And I honestly didn't know if I had it in me to be a mom. I've never wanted kids. And now I have two 12-year-olds. And I wasn't even sure how to parent. Honestly, I just figured if I did the opposite of how I was raised, we were probably going to be okay. And I would personally like to thank COVID-19 virus for shutting down the world and because my wedding was canceled. To be fair, at the time I thought it was postponed. But man, things were getting bad at the house, and I could tell that it was time to leave. So I was an absolute menace until he actually asked me to move out. So I ended up moving out the same week my dental hygiene applications were due. So that was a pretty hard time to be crying, writing applications that were honestly going to decide whether I was going to get an interview or not. But as you know, I got in, and my daughter and I were on our own. And I do think it was very important for her to see me work and go to school because she was 12 years old when I got her. But she was 13 when I started the program, and I would come home from school and I would cry and I would tell her how hard it was and how tired I was. And she would tell me how proud of me she was. And I was, oh, you're so strong and I'm so proud of you. And now she's in her senior year and working, and I just see so much of myself in her. And I'm like so glad that she got to see me go through that. And I graduated 2 years ago, and I actually received a bachelor's degree in the half a credit that I needed to actually graduate high school, which I find to be pretty ironic. And I've been trying to find my footing at the right office that's a right fit for me. I started temping when I graduated to see like what offices were like. And I decided on one office that was nice to me at the time. And I quickly thought, oh my God, I made a terrible mistake. I hate this career. But it turns out I really just hated the office, not the people. I really liked the people, but the office. I just didn't want to work 10-hour days. It was really hard on my body. I was like miserable. So I found another office pretty quickly, actually, that I really liked. I swore I'd never leave. But I recently left because I was given the opportunity to make more money at a newer office that I was working at on Fridays. And, I really did think I was happy at that other office that I worked at for almost 2 years. But I realize now that I feel so much better at this new office. And I'm really glad I chose to take a risk and move on. I think that's been like the motto of my new life. And since getting clean, it's like just taking risks to better myself and better my life. And I haven't always succeeded, but man, when I have, it's been so good. And so I think that's probably why I finally just decided to say, fuck it. Let's go for it with the podcast, because I really love telling my story. I love talking with people. I want to talk to all of you. I want to try to make an impact, however that might be. So I want you to get ready for some guests to come on, talk about the stuff that will make you laugh or make you cry, but most of all, make you feel seen and not alone. That's really the goal. So yeah, thanks for sticking around, listening to me. I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.